and development of political science in the United States. And we talk about the period that starts from the end of the 19th century and the mid-50s or mid-60s. We talked about the legalist constitutional approach, the historical approach, and we talked about behavioralism with its positivist tools. We talked about post-behavioralism, and then we talked about the classification of the four types of political science: the hard left, the hard right, the soft left, the soft right, and all this stuff. But actually, there is something that we haven't talked about, which is very important. What is political theory? What is the definition of political theory? Actually, you don't need to write anything because you will receive your readings and it really contains more than enough. Just pay me attention, pay me attention. Like every concept in social science, political theory has its own problems. The main problem about the concept of political theory, not just the term political, but actually the word theory. What does theory mean? This is a very important issue, a very confusing and very perplexing issue. When we say political theory, actually this gives us the impression that there are theoretical things that we should say, or that we have to say about politics. Right? That is the meaning of political theory, a theory about politics. And it gives us the impression that the field of political science is actually theoretical science. And actually that is not true. Why you do not really understand political theory, or why you do not know the relation between the different branches of political science, is that you have no vision, you have no classification of the different sciences that we call political science. Aristotle, he made classification of knowledge, of fields of knowledge. He talked about theoretical sciences and practical sciences. Theoretical sciences deal with objects that depend on necessity, like fire. Fire burns by necessity. Dogs breed dogs, not cats, by necessity. So theoretical science deal with objects that are based on necessity. Practical sciences, they deal with objects based on will, on human will. So here we have the objects of necessity, here we have the objects of will. According to the old classification of science, theoretical sciences are studied as a purpose. Studying theoretical sciences was a purpose in itself. Why do you study philosophy? Because it should be studied. Practical sciences, these are studied because you want to bring about certain kind of change. They are studied for a certain purpose. They are a means to a certain purpose. What are the examples of theoretical sciences according to Aristotle? Metaphysics, music, mathematics, physics, biology. These are theoretical sciences. The practical sciences, ethics, economics, and politics. So according to Aristotle, political science is a practical science, in the sense that its object is based on will, not necessity.
And in the sense that you study it for a purpose, because you want to change something in reality, you want to bring about something. And here is the first contradiction that we can see in the notion of political theory. This paradox, this contradiction between theory and practice. Is political science theoretical or practical? When we say political theory, it means that we move the whole field to this area. However, according to the Aristotelian classification, political science, political philosophy, and all it entails belong to this area. And you see, it's not just about moving places. Every science has its own definition about the object it deals with, about the purpose of studying it. If you want to know why sometimes you do not understand a certain topic or a certain issue, it is because you do not know what is the main object studied in this discipline and what is the purpose of studying it. So, and what on earth will happen if we make political science theoretical or practical? There is actually a balance between the two fields of theory and practice. Theory is not practice. Theory is not separated from practice. They are intertwined. They are linked with one another. However, they are distinct. Although they are not the same, but they are not separate. Which means that not all knowledge is actually based on theory. It's not necessarily the case, because we have theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. And theory is not the basis of all practice. It is not necessarily the case. If you destroy the balance between theory and practice, so sometimes you tilt the balance towards theory and you say theory is the basis of all practice. Or if you tilt it towards practice, you will say every theory, every knowledge has its origin in practice. That is not the case. There is knowledge that originates in theory and knowledge that originates in practice. Like what? When we talk about logic, when we talk about metaphysics, when we talk about mathematics, these fields of knowledge are related to theory. When we talk about the art of government, how to address an audience, how to issue laws. For instance, every law has preamble, something like an introduction that introduces the logic of a certain law. So, for instance, if we issue a law saying that every person who remains unmarried after the age of 35 will pay a fine, it doesn't really make any sense. But there is an art of practicing authority, an art of legislation. And this is in the preamble. So when we say, for instance, that this society is facing challenges, military and economic challenges, and it suffers from the scarcity or the lack of density of the population. So it needs to reproduce its protective and productive powers. As such, the government does everything in its power in order to increase the number of people. As such, it will impose a fine on those people who remain unmarried after the age of 35. Here, you can practice authority. Authority is practiced by words, and this is why political leaders give speeches in order to maintain a kind of contact with the ruled. Or authority is practiced by deeds, that you impose deeds. How do you impose deeds? By laws. Now you are silent. You do not speak. Because by one way or another, you know that one of the rules of this lecture hall is that you should keep quiet. question is, how can one impose his will in order to produce a certain kind of behavior through legislation? This is an art. This is not a theoretical art, this is a practical art. So not every knowledge has its origin in practice. And not every theory is based on practice. There is a field of theoretical knowledge and there is a field of practical knowledge. There is a balance between both. They are related to one another. They are not separate, but certainly they are not the same. So one problem, the first problem of political theory is this contradiction between theory and practice. The second contradiction that we have in the notion of political theory is the contradiction between theory and observation. حضراتكم أحيانا لما تخشوا على بعض تلاقي واحد بيسأل سؤال يقول هي إيه النظرية؟ You quite often hear something like that. What does he mean? What he means by this, he wants a certain statement that explains everything, that explains the situation. So here, there is an observation of a certain event. Hitler came to power. Revolution erupted in Egypt. That is an observation composed of data, information. But that is not a theory. A theory is an assertive statement. It's a hypothetical statement. The F1. Theory is a hypothetical statement that tries to explain the certain event that you know about through data. If you say unemployment was the cause of the rise of fascism in Europe, that is a theory. And it's different from data and it's different from observation. The thing is, the linguistic origin of the word theory, the Greek origin of the word theory, does not warrant this distinction between explanation and observation. What does theory in Greek actually mean? Theoria in Greek, it means to attend a festival, to consult the opinion of the gods, to go and celebrate, to watch, to hold an opinion, to compare, to observe, to make contrast. So you see, the Greek origin of the word does not really warrant, does not allow that distinction between explanation and observation. These misgivings about political theory, that the discussion of political questions is purely theoretical when we say it's political theory, or that political knowledge can be divided into a hypothetical explanation and observed facts. These misgivings led one of the most prominent theorists, his name is Leo Strauss, say that, well, actually, I refuse the term political theory. I do not accept it. And I would instead choose the concept of political philosophy. And that's exactly what we will do. We will talk about political philosophy. And when we say political science or political philosophy, it's actually the same thing. Previously, or according to behavioralists, there was this separation between philosophy and science because science to them was quantitative and empirical science. Science that uses behavioralist approaches. But if you get rid of that definition, that behavioralist definition of science, we can go back to the original definition of philosophy, which actually makes science its equivalent. So what is political philosophy? Political philosophy is a coherent reflection on the essentials of political life, in order, based on that reflection, to come up with criteria according to which we evaluate political life or political reality, that is, its institutions and actions or practices. Let us stay a while. Political theory, it is a coherent reflection. And please look up in the dictionary what the word reflection means. It is a coherent reflection on the essentials, main issues, main things of political life or political reality. In order, based on that reflection, to come up with criteria. And based on that criteria, you will evaluate political reality, its institutions and its practices. So what is it that we want to do? We want to go deep in the essence of political reality. What is the essence of political reality? What is the essence of politics? What is the essence of power? What is the essence of authority? How do we do this? By studying issues related to political reality. And based on such study, we will come up with criteria in order to evaluate that political reality. Why do you want to evaluate? Why do we evaluate? Wake up. Why do we make evaluations? Why do we make exams? What's the point of having an exam? Exactly. I evaluate in order to know the level of progress you have or the lack of progress you have in order to modify your behavior. And here you can see how political philosophy is a practical science. And here you can see that this definition of political theory does not separate explanation from evaluation, does not separate the scientific practice from the moral background or the ethical background. Do you understand this definition? If you don't understand it, tell me now. Otherwise, what is it that you don't understand? We start with political reality. Any topic in political reality. We want to study the different forms of government. Okay, let us study the different forms of government. Why? Because I want to know what is the essence of government. Which government? Any government. A democratic government, a monarchy, a militaristic dictatorship, a theocracy. All these have in common that they are governments, right? It means that they have the same essence, and that is why we call them governments. If they were different things, we would not call them governments. So I start from studying any form of government, any government, real government, in political reality, in order to reach the essence of government. And based on that essence, I will come up with a criteria according to which I will evaluate the different forms of government. So here, explanation on one side is followed by evaluation on the other side. Here you will find no separation between values and facts like in behavioralism. no value neutrality, like in behavioralism. No focusing just on the facts, but also on values, and even those essences that lie behind facts. After all, the state has an essence, and this is why you call England a state, and you call Somalia a state, and you call Australia a state, and you call Russia a state, with different peoples, different languages, different traditions, different forms of government, different sizes. However, you use the same word, state, which means that they have the same essence. The question is, what is the state? And here I'm not talking about the three elements, the territory, the government, and the sovereignty, whatever. I'm talking about the essence. What makes a state a state? You know what's a dog. When you see a dog, you realize it's a dog. Even when you cannot see its color, even when you're not wearing your glasses and you cannot know its kind, but you know it's a dog. And if you see a cat, you will know this is a cat. The question is because you know in a pre-scientific way what is the essence of a dog and what is the essence of a cat. So here we are studying political reality in order to know the essence of politics, or the essence of political phenomena, in order, based on this study, to come up with moral criteria, ideals, according to which we can judge, we can evaluate the different forms of government in reality. It's not difficult, it's very easy. The reason why you cannot see it because you have been used to the behavioralist tradition that separates facts from values. And all you do is to explain facts. But here, there is another element which is evaluation. Yes, somebody had a question, please.
Who would judge afterward the difference between the essence of the rightness and the wrongness of the essence? Some other scientists may come and say this is the essence of the law.
Yes, you're right about that. You're totally right about that. That's a very big problem. That's a very big problem. And we will see, did Aristotle get it right when he talked about the essence of politics and when he talked about the essence of the state? Now what's the difference between political thought and political philosophy in this sense? Political philosophy, it is methodological, systematic, coherent. But political thought, political ideas, impressions, statements about political realities, they existed all along, even before we had political philosophy. We cannot talk about the political philosophy of Hitler. We cannot talk about the political philosophy of Nazi. They don't have, because political philosophy implies that you have done very coherent and systematic reflection on political reality. But if you have just some ideas and prescriptions about political reality based on intuition, based on your personal preferences, based on social background, this is political thought, not political philosophy. Is that right? You don't see. So I've drawn two circles. The bigger one is political philosophy and the smaller one is political thought. Is this a good illustration to you? No, it's the wrong illustration. That's exactly the opposite of what I have been explaining all along. Political thought is wider than political philosophy. Political philosophy is narrower because it is coherent reflection, systematic. But political ideas, political thought, they existed all along. Now, you can see that here we take the terms science and philosophy as synonyms. Here, they mean the same thing. So when we say political philosophy, it's like we say political science. Why? Because we got rid of the positivist, behavioralist definition of science. What is that? I think I've explained that when we talked about behavioralism last week. Now, if you remember, we talked about the historical phases of Western political science. We said we will focus only on American political science. That is something very narrow because the history of political science is very wide. It's much longer than that. What is important about political science, and this is exactly the message of this discipline to you as scholars of political science, what is more important is not just the issues, the topics that you study. Government, power, international relations, international system, these are only topics. And even more important than the topics and the concepts, describing them, not just the approaches, the behavioralist approach, the elite approach, the group approach, discourse analysis. What is more important than topics, concepts, and approaches is the tradition. The traditions of political science. Every phase in political science has its own tradition. What is tradition? A set of rules, a set of principles that govern the analysis of politics. If you remember when we talked about the four sub-trends of the four main trends of American political science, the hard left, the soft left, the hard right, and the soft right, we said that even inside every trend, there are sub-trends. Every trend is a tradition. School. Remember when we talked about the soft left, and we said one of its main principles that it cannot separate knowledge from the social process. It does not accept value neutrality. It does not accept dividing the human life into separate circles and separate spheres, and it looks at human existence as one big totality with different aspects. You remember that? These are elements of one tradition. But even inside that tradition, we have different subschools. The question is, what are the traditions of political science historically? And historically, we have two traditions in political science. We have the legitimate utopianism and the modern utopianism. In order to understand the tradition of legitimate utopianism, or what we later on will call the classical political science. So when I say classical political science, classical political philosophy, legitimate utopianism, or classical utopianism, or traditional utopianism, all these concepts, all these terms refer to one tradition in political science embodied in the writings of Plato and Aristotle. This is totally different from modern political philosophy, or modern political science, or modern utopianism. In order to understand legitimate utopianism or classical political science, we have to go to the first concept which constitutes the very first discovery of political philosophy, which is the notion of nature. This is a very important concept. Concepts like God, essence, will, the world, they all existed before the invention of philosophy. But the notion of nature, it came with philosophy. And here we're talking about Greek philosophy in the 6th and the 7th century BC. Now, what is nature? What is nature? Tell me, what is nature? What is nature? Say anything.
Many figures talk about the state of nature. But what nature is this here? What's around us, whether objects or whatever.
That is a totally different notion from nature. This is the common notion of nature. This is the things that do exist around us. This is the world. The world is this, is what you say. But nature is something different. Nature is a certain order, a certain rule, a certain regulation that is neither made by man nor by the gods. Please remember that here we're talking about Greek philosophy, which was a polytheistic philosophy. So we are talking about a certain order, a certain arrangement, a certain rule, a certain regulation. It is not made by anybody, not by man, not by the gods. That is valid. It has the same force in every place and in every time. And it puts limits on the arbitrariness of human behavior. That sounds very difficult. It's not difficult at all. It is not difficult at all. Let me say that again. Nature is an order, is an arrangement. It is not made by anybody. It exists. It is there. It's an ideal order that is valid everywhere. It has the same force everywhere. It is the perfect order everywhere, in every society, in every time. And at the same time, it ties the arbitrariness of human behavior. You want to see the arbitrariness of human behavior? When I say, that will be all for today, you may leave. What will happen? Somebody will speak, somebody will stand up, somebody will sleep, somebody will celebrate, somebody will eat, somebody will smoke. See? Arbitrariness. If that arbitrariness was checked by a certain order, the order that we are having at this moment, that you listen, that you pay attention, is that the best order? I do not know. Best for me. But is that the best order? Maybe not. Maybe if we transform these lectures into, some file that you would send to everybody and they would watch at home and then they send by emails the questions, maybe that would be a better order to curb, to check the political, the arbitrariness of human behavior. We do not know what that order might be. And it is the task of philosophy to reach that perfect order. So here, nature is not those things that surround us. Nature here means an ideal order. Does it exist in reality? No, it does not. Will it ever exist? No. Now, in order to understand the notion of nature, we have to understand the concept or the notion that opposes it. Men and women get married. We agree upon this? How? It's different. Different forms of weddings. In every society, different forms of engagement, different tools of celebration. Even in the same society, it differs from one phase to another. But women do not marry dogs, and men do not marry cats. We all know this. We know that the right order that is valid everywhere, that men would marry women. Does anybody contradict this? Do you contradict this? Yes? You want to talk about homosexuality. Well, I would have explained that, but with the presence of all these young ladies, I feel very awkward about it. But if you were only there, I would have explained it in detail. So I will not answer that question. But let us take it for granted that men marry women. And even in the case that you mentioned, there is positive and negative. Yes, they appear to be both positive or both negative, but they are positive and negative. I cannot explain more. Anyway, so we agree that there is nature and there is convention all over. We know that men marry women in all societies at all times. But there are different forms of marriage. We know that people die, human beings die. That is valid, and the same force everywhere. Whether they are Muslims or Christians or Jews or atheists, they die. But the forms of funerals or the celebration of death is different from one culture to another, from one society to another. So, nature is based on the notion of necessity. Why? Necessary? Because it is based on the nature of human being. Convention, it is not based on necessity, it is based on will. You can have a very big wedding with cakes, or you offer no food, or you may not have a wedding at all. Or you may not get married and live with a woman. So that's the full value, engagement assumption. So in this sense, nature is fixed. Convention is changing, varying. Nature is one. Convention is many. Now, nature is necessary and convention is arbitrary. Just based on your preferences. You make a funeral or you do not make a funeral. You make an expensive funeral or you make a very little funeral. Doesn't matter. So it's arbitrary. Now you understand this doublet, nature and convention. Nature is the notion of nature is the invention of political philosophy. The invention of philosophy per se. Now take this notion of nature, of an ideal order that is valid everywhere. Let us take it from the field of philosophy to the field of politics. Then, can we not ask whether there is an ideal form of government that is valid everywhere, according to which we can evaluate the behavior of different rulers, and according to which we can introduce changes and reforms in the various forms of government? You have the notion of nature. Can you not ask these questions? Can you not ask these questions? You are totally asleep. I know this is not the best time for a lecture in political theory, but you have to bear with this, and I will have to bear with this. We have this notion of nature as an ideal order, valid everywhere, and checks arbitrariness. If you import that notion from philosophy and you take it to the field of politics, then you will ask the question, What is the ideal form of government? If you remember when you studied Plato and when you studied Aristotle, they always ask that question. Their philosophies try to answer that specific question. What is the ideal form of government? Why were they asking that question? They were asking that question because they have the notion of nature in their minds. They were asking that question because if you reach an understanding of the ideal form of government, you will have criteria, you will have a yardstick according to which you can evaluate and judge the different forms of government, the different behaviors of various rulers. And accordingly, when you can evaluate, you can introduce reforms and changes to the different forms of government. One of you might ask, well, I can make those changes in order to make reality become ideal, in order to impose the ideal on the reality and make the ideal and reality one. That's exactly here that we have the difference between classical utopianism and modern utopianism. In classical utopianism, there is always this distance between nature and convention, between ideal and reality. An ideal can never become a reality. The word nature in Greek literally means an object of wish, an object of prayer. It will never, ever materialize in reality. If this happens, it is only by chance. But nothing, absolutely nothing that you will do that will enable those ideals to be imposed on reality. And it's exactly here that you can understand the radicalism of ideological movements, whether we're talking about Islamist movements or communist movements, that they want to close the gap between the ideal and the reality. But in fact, according to classical political science, and this is actually Greek, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim philosophers, and even Muslim theologians, they believe that the ideal cannot become a reality. Let me give you a little example. When you pray, you're supposed to concentrate, right? Do you concentrate 100%? No. But you strive to attain that concentration. Why? Why do we have an ideal if we will not implement it in reality? We have an ideal in order to check the arbitrariness of our human conduct, of our human behavior. Without an ideal, without a norm, every one of you will do whatever suits him, or whatever he likes, he or she. In this sense, the ideal is a standard for judgment on the arbitrary inaccuracy of rulers. And it is a guide for reform and improvements to the different forms of government. But still, the distance between the ideal and reality will be maintained. Now, the ideal is good, and the ideal is right. And philosophy seeks to reach that ideal, to come up with that ideal, to figure out what this ideal order might be. The ideal order not just of a form of government, the ideal order of human life. What would be the ideal order of human life in all its aspects? And when we reach that ideal, we will be able to evaluate different forms of human life and introduce adjustments and changes. So, nature is what is good. And here you can find the anti-traditional force of political philosophy. Traditionalists maintain that the old days, the old times were the golden times. Why? Because they equate the old with the good. So everything that happened in the past was good. Because the old equals the good. Modernists, on the other hand, equate the good with the new. Everything that is new. Why do you change your cell phones? Why do you follow clothes fashion? Because you equate everything that is good with what is new. So you want to attain, you want to possess everything that is new, because new is good. Philosophy teaches us that that is not necessarily the case. It might be so, and it might not be so. What we seek to reach is the ideal, the good. It might belong to the old. It might belong to the new. And it might not at all. In fact, classical political philosophy maintains that the ideals, although we discover them in time, we discover them in history. However, they are not historical creations. The ideal form of government, the utopia of Plato, will never materialize in reality. The ideal city neither existed, it does not exist, nor will it exist in the future. It is only an ideal. And no matter how hard you will work in order to implement it in reality, there will always be a gap between the ideal and reality. That is one of the main principles of classical utopianism, or classical political science. In this sense, we can say that classical utopianism is legitimate. It is legitimate in the sense it is not deceptive. It does not deceive you. It does not tell you that the ideal is part of history. The ideal will materialize in the future. Just work hard and you will find the ideal. But it tells you from the start that the ideal can never come in reality. It is not deceptive and it is legitimate because it does not make any predictions. It does not tell you that if you follow this line, in the future, after 10 years, the ideal will materialize. But it tells you in advance, it is honest, that the ideal nature will never become conventional. Why do we call it utopian? We call it utopian because utopia means outside. Utopia means nowhere. It is outside place. That is the ideal. And it tells you this ideal that comes out of nowhere, you will not find it anywhere. This is why it is not deceptive. And at the same time, it is practical. It is practical in the sense that it allows you to judge reality and to introduce changes to reality. When you hear the word practical, you will have to equate it with introducing change. Practical means action. So, classical utopianism is practical because it helps you to introduce changes to reality. It points to the direction to be taken by improvement and reformative efforts. The very soul of the writings of Plato and Aristotle is to discover these ideals, whether we're talking about ethics, economics, or politics, or even drama, history, and art. They seek to discover the ideal. One of the main principles of this tradition of classical utopianism or legitimate utopianism is that the perfect order, that is to say the ideal, will never materialize in reality. However, any actual order can be improved and changed. This is why you will find, for instance, when you will see this in the book of Aristotle, when he talks about, in book 5, he talks about revolutions. And he talks about the different forms of government, and he tells you how to introduce changes and reform these forms of government, even tyranny, in order to avoid a revolution. Because for him, just like Plato, a revolution is a plague, a revolution is a disease. He's not a fan of a revolution. However, also one of the principles of that tradition, that you cannot uproot any form of government. You can only supplant. Do not think that you can eradicate a form of government totally. You cannot uproot. You cannot destroy it totally. You can only supplement it. You can only change it in a piecemeal fashion. The form that the literature belonging to that tradition will take is called the mirror of princes. Now, if we know that there is an unbridgeable gap between ideal and reality, that the distance between nature and convention can never be closed, that ideal is only a matter of wish or a matter of prayer. If it happens in reality, it's only an accident. That no matter how hard you will work, the ideal will not become a reality. In this sense, the political literature based on that tradition will take the form of advice, moral advice, moral exhortation to the rulers to follow the guidelines of decency and humanity in order to make the current or the existing form of government a little bit closer to the ideal. But you already know that the ideal will never be a part of reality. That kind of literature was called the mirror of princes, and the German word, Fürstenspiegel. It also means the mirror of rulers or princes. But the Muslims called it the literature of advice, Adab al-Nasiha, in which a certain author was directing a piece of advice to a ruler, a person in charge, who rules, in order to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And certainly they did not deceive themselves that he would do everything. But they thought that if they give this moral advice, things might become better. I don't know whether you studied the works of Al-Mawardi or Al-Ghazali. They also belong to the mirror of princes. And although Machiavelli hated very much this kind of literature, mirror of princes, you can see that he himself wrote his book in order to give advice to princes. So here you can see how a person is being a part of tradition, but at the same time he revolts against its principles. And we will see now what is meant by this. Even the commentary of Ibn Rushd on the Republic of Plato, we can say that it belongs to this genre, this sort of literature. Although it does not contain a dedication at the start of the book, it starts in a very dry way by mentioning the Aristotelian classification of knowledge and locating the different works of Aristotle and Plato according to that classification. However, at the end of the book, you will find that he is directing the book to a person who has a political endeavor, and he prays to God to help that person. And you will find that he is introducing that work as kind of help to that prince. And we will know afterwards that Ibn Rushd, after writing that commentary, was actually sent to exile for 7 years or 9 years, I don't remember, in a tiny Jewish village, because he was part of a plot against the current ruler in the city in which he was living. That is actually the classical tradition of political
science, which started from the 6th century before Christ until Machiavelli. Machiavelli is thought to be the father of modern political science, and actually he despised the classical tradition of political science. He proposed it, and if you read the very first lines of his Prince, you will find that he's saying, people build republics in the air. It is only part of their imagination, while we should focus on the real behavior of princes. And you can see, if you read the Prince, that he only focuses on the tricks, the strategies, the tactics that will enable the prince, any ruler, to rule better. Not better in terms of right and wrong, but better in terms of maintaining authority, not losing authority. Machiavelli said that those in power will not listen to moral advice in order to improve their way of government. They will not do this. And after all, the ideals that classical political thinkers, classical political philosophers were talking about cannot be implemented in reality. So why bother talk about these ideals? What political science, what political philosophy should focus upon is not to seek the perfect order of government, but how best to rule in terms of reaching authority and maintaining authority. That is the task of a political philosopher, to present this kind of knowledge to the ruler, even if the ruler was evil, even if the ruler was evil. It doesn't matter. It is not his job. It is not your job whether the ruler is evil or not evil. It is not your job what he will do, his goals, his objectives, his motives. It is not your job. You are not here to present him with a set of ideals, with perfect order of government. But you will give him a recipe of how to grasp authority most properly. Here you can see that this was a very dangerous course. Extremely dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because remember when we talked about the notion of nature, and we said that its main function was to check the arbitrariness of human behavior. So when classical political philosophers sought to reach the ideal form of government, it was also to check the arbitrariness of the behavior of rulers. Well, if there are no ideals, if there is no criteria, what will the rulers do? Anything they want. If I tell you at the moment, in this lecture hall, there are no rules. If you want to speak, speak. If you want to eat, eat. If you want to dance, dance. If you want to go outside, go outside. What will happen? How many of you will listen? Well, actually, very few. And I doubt that this view even might exist. So the ideal is there to check human arbitrariness. Abolish the ideal, get rid of the ideal. What would happen? Every person will do whatever he likes. You attend lectures, even when you feel bored. You go to the sections, even if you don't like them. Why? Because there are exams. What if there are no exams? How many of you will read the readings? How many of you will attend the lectures? How many of you will try to understand something? Very, very few. But what will be the common behavior, the conventional behavior? That every person will do whatever he likes. You would certainly like that. But that is not right. That is desire. That is not what is good. That is what is pleasant. That is what brings you pleasure. And both are two different things.
People who really understood that Machiavelli had a point in a certain way, were really afraid of the dangerous consequences of abolishing every ideal. They understood that the classical ideals are very high. What are these classical ideals? In Plato you will find four main ideals: justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance or moderation. These are the ideals upon which the polity, the government should be based. The ideal form of government is actually the theoretical embodiment of these morals. So, some people thought, yes, Machiavelli had point. These ideals are very up in the sky. They cannot really be implemented in reality. However, if we abolish the ideals because of this, chaos will erupt. We will have various forms of government and various political behaviors that we cannot check. Now imagine if you go to a doctor and you have a kind of disease. Every doctor studied in medicine school 3 years about the healthy human body, and then another 3 years about diseases. So first, he understood what is the ideal human body. Certainly this ideal human body does not exist in reality. My body, neither my body nor your bodies are ideal. And after studying these ideals, he is able to differentiate between what is normal and what is abnormal. What is a disease and what is not a disease. Now imagine that he has not studied the ideal human body. How would he know that this is a disease? To him, there will be no diseases. These are all different conditions of the human body. That's exactly the problem of behavioralism. When behavioralism abolished these ideals, all the different forms of government became on the same level. You've got to deal with them. Nothing is better than anything else, because after all, we are value-free and we are objective and neutral. So here you can see the problem. In order to solve this dilemma, they opted for something. They said, well, actually, if the ideals are very high, let us bring them closer to reality. If one of you on the very first year, he said, every year I will not get below the grade of excellent, then after 2 years he discovered that it only gets good. So he will say, well, it's very well that I pass, it's not a problem. He lowered the ceiling, he lowered the ideals. So they said, okay, if there are no ideals, we will get lost. So let us lower our ideals. Plato and Aristotle talked about happiness as the highest good. So instead of the highest good, they said, okay, let us not talk about the highest good. Let us talk about the common good. The question is, what is the common good? Even if you watch American movies, you will find them talking about the common good. What is this common good? To Plato and Aristotle, the highest good was happiness. And they have their own definition of happiness. It took Aristotle to write this whole book, Ethics, to define what is happiness. I would have liked to teach you Aristotle's ethics, but it is a bit different. Common good, it means good living standards. Here you can see how the ceiling became very low. But there arose a problem. If I say the common good, or common interest, don't you have private interests, each and every one of you? So, while the former ideal kept the arbitrariness of human behavior in check, so established social harmony and unity, when we lowered the ceiling and we started talking about the common good or common interest, we had the notion of private interests. And how to match common interest with private interests. Let us say that I bring you a new reading, and I gave it to one of you. It is in the common interest of each and every one of you to have a copy. But it is in the private interest of that person to have just one copy. How do you match both? That is the problem. And in order to solve that problem, so modern political philosophers said, well, actually listen, that is not your real interest, your real private interest. This is your unenlightened private interest. Like what? Each one of you will be happy if he eats 5 or 6 donuts, right? But is that healthy? So I will have to enlighten you about your real private interests. If you become enlightened about your real, about your private interests, there will be no disharmony between your private interests or between these private interests and the common interests. So if I tell you, well, actually your unenlightened private interest to get one copy of the reading, however, if everybody gets a copy and the reading is difficult, if you do not understand it, you can seek the help and advice of others. And you, according to this, you can perfect your understanding, answer better in the exam, and get more grades. In this sense, there is no contradiction between the private interest, the enlightened private interest, and the common interest of everybody to get a copy. And if we do something like that, so the ideal gets realized naturally by an economic process. Just enlighten the people about their self-interests, and we will establish peace, and we will establish harmony, and the ideal will materialize in reality. Here you can find the principle of modern utopianism, that the ideal will become a reality by an automatic and natural process. Just enlighten the people about their interests. أعتقد أن